Hello everyone, today we are going to present the topic about the quantitative research development of the group 1. So let's start. Welcome to topic 10. Please my classmate Christina Lomoto introduce your topic.
Well, topic number 10.1, the importance of hypotheses in quantitative research. Continue, please. The importance of hypotheses. Constructing the hypothesis is the key aspect when starting a research study or formulating the research problems, because it helps to clearly see what the objective of the research is, a concentrate with more emphasis on the research problem itself. The hypothesis is an idea about a circumstance, phenomenon, or relationship that requires to be analyzed, which that point becomes the center of an investigation. The substantial value of the hypothesis is to improve new knowledge or improve it. The analysis of a hypothesis through investigation based on the data collected allows supporting, confirming, or not validating it. In a word, that is testable, and what is basically tested is a relationship between the variables. Continue, please. 10.2, that objectives of the hypothesis in quantitative research. Continue, please. The objectives of the hypothesis. The objectives of the hypothesis are expressed in the following ideas. To gather information to formulate a statement about how the variables are possibly connected in the research study. To improve knowledge, considering that the hypothesis provides some ideas to make a possible statement about the research topic. To provide the investigator with a relation statement that is openly testable in an investigation. To provide direction to the research, since it helps the investigator what to do in the research process. To determine what focus on in the research study. To select what research method to use to investigate. To decide on which statistical text to apply for analyzing the data. To provide an outline for reporting the results and conclusions of the research. Thanks. Continue, please.
How to come up with an hypothesis in quantitative research. The hypothesis arises from a practical problem that needs explanation and solution. It can be inductive or deductive. Inductive is when it's taken from observation, collects information, and draws conclusions. Deductive is when the findings are based on previous research. The inductive method is generally used in teaching. It is formulated by generalizing relationships between variables to finally give an explanation to what is observed. To generate an hypothesis, the researcher first observes and analyzes what the problem is, and reviews the literature to find evidence. His hypothesis is related to observed behavior. The deductive hypothesis, on the other hand, is taken from a theory already transmitted. The researcher reaches a logical conclusion through deductive reasoning. After reasoning the hypothesis, it must be verified that it meets the following characteristics. Relationship between variables that can be verified, be consistent with the prior knowledge, it must be precise and concrete. Continue. Types of hypotheses. They are classified as follows. Simple hypothesis expresses the relationship between dependent and independent variables. Complex hypothesis relates more than two variables. Research hypotheses focus on the possible outcome of a scientific investigation. Null hypothesis, there is no relationship between variables. Alternative hypothesis, it is contrary to the null hypothesis. Logical hypothesis can be logically verified. And a statistical hypothesis, it is statistically verified. Continue next period.
Then number 5, research project steps, hypothesis testing. Continue, please. Hypothesis testing. A formal procedure used in statistics to test whether an stated hypothesis can be accepted or not. Has as it been proposed to make assumptions about the subject to be studied and verified. The verification methodology used will depend on the type of sample data collected, whether obtained from observation, literature, or analytical process. Next, please. Why the hypothesis? There is a null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. The former does not involve any external factor, and the latter involves several variables or change. Analysis plan determines how to read the results to verify which of the both hypotheses created is true. Analyze all types of data presented. Data analysis. The analysis plan is put into practice. Interpretation. The results are interpreted to identify the validate of the hypothesis. Continue, please. Next, we with the topic 11, research designs definitions. Continue, please. Definitions. The design of research can be defined as the plan of method, techniques, strategies that aims to validate the research questions and their approaches, detailing the work process and verifying why each element is being used. According to Kellinger, research design is the plan, structure, and strategy of investigation conceived so as to obtain answers to research questions and to control variance. The fundamentals of research designs are accurate proposed statement, techniques to be used for analyzing research, the method applied for analyzing collected data, type of the research methodology, the participants and sources, the variables and hypotheses. This is relevant. Is possible disagreements for research, location for the research study, timeline, and the measuring of analysis. Main characteristics: neutrality, reliability, validity, and generalization.
The functions and the needs of a research design. Continue, please. Functions. The research design could be called as a framework or basis with which a researcher plans his or her research includes the type of research, objective, data analysis. The research design establishes the parameters of any research, determines what is included and what is not included, defines the criteria according to which the results will be evaluated. The reliability and validity of any study will depend on how the data collected, measured, analyzed, and interpreted. The research design establishes the structure of the research as well as its nature, also specifies the variables as well as the tools to be used to study those variables and what techniques will be employed. Continue, please. The research design could be experimental, that is, one or more independent variables are intentionally manipulated to analyze the consequence that the manipulation has one or more dependent variables within a control situation for the researcher. Non-experimental phenomena as observed as they occur in the natural context in order to analyze them. Continue, please. Necessities of a research design. Neutrality. The research must be free of personal opinions and its results must be free of ideological or any other type of bias. Reliable objectivity. It must indicate precisely how the information will be collected and how it will be analyzed to ensure a reliable model so that the experiment can be repeated over and over again. Validity. The result will be valid if it employs adequate measurement techniques and tools according to which the researcher can be measured the results in accordance with the objective studied. In the case of quantitative data studies, the methods must be quantifiable and statistical. Generalization. The results of the research should be applicable to larger groups, not only to restricted segments on which the study was made. Continue, please. A brief summary of quantitative research design. Continue, please. Characteristics. The quantitative research process is characterized by being sequential and evidential. It starts from the idea and ends its result. Its procedure is orderly and seeks to prove something. It is subjective and distant from the researcher. It is hypothetical and deductive. Its hypothesis is based on the problem, which could be modified after the literature review process. Its data are numerical and require statistical verification. The characteristic of quantitative research stem from its research paradigm. Quantitative problem statements are derived from the gap in that literature. They seek what still needs to be investigated. The research problem should express the relationship between two or more concepts or variables. The problem should be asked a question in a way that expresses the intention of the study. What effect, what relationship, what probability exists? The research problem should also detail the background, the context, and the significant support with facts of data. Its objectives will start from the general to particular. The theoretical framework is a fundamental element of quantitative research. Statistical test results should be interpreted according to theoretical assumptions. Continue, please. Quantitative research must be feasible in resources, verify whether human and financial resources are available to carry out the research. The more information gathered, the more resources are needed. Data. The more data, the better results will be obtained and fewer results will be used. So it is important to have significant amount of data to carry out the research. Results. The results should be timely since very long research may not be very useful. Continue, please.
Important concept. Important causes concept research design. Continue, please. Important concept. Variables. Are concepts that are designed and qualitative values to be measured independent. Variables is a variable that is unchanging and unified by the other variables that can be measured. Dependent variable is a variable that depends on the other factors and are measured. Continuous variable is a variable that has a quantitative value and even can be expressed in decimals, for example, age of a student. Non-continuous discrete or variable is a variable that has quantitative values that only can be expressed in integer values, for example, a number standard. External variable is a variable that is not related to proposed approach study, but could affect the results of the experiment. The predicted variable is a part of the experimental that is being manipulated to see if it has have an effect of dependent variable. Experimental error. Anything that affects the dependent variable as consequence and of an external variable. Control. The action is minimizing the effect and external variables when carried out and research studies. confirm the relation. Control group is a group that is not exposed to any experimental within the study. Experimental group is a group that is exposed to particular experimental condition within the study. Training are the different conditions of the researcher under which the experimental and control groups are studied. Experimental is the process it verifies an hypothesis of is it true or not. Continue, please. How to plan experimental quantitative research design? Continue, please. Before conducting an experimental investigation, it's necessary to formulate an objective. It is appropriate to experiment. A research hypothesis can be defined as a proper experimentation, clarifies the body evidence, and can be confirmed by further investigation. In experimental research, it's common to establish two different types of hypotheses, the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. And the one hypothesis that being started is necessary to decide how test and what experimental design use. The most commonly used experimental design is the pretend process and control design. This experimental design includes of group participation who are assembled into two groups called and the experimental groups and the control group. The experimental group is the one of the exposed of the control situation, while the control group is not. The groups are subject to pre-test and they post-test to see what the difference can be focused. Appropriate pre-post and post-test measures are developed to ensure and evaluate and reliability of the results. Subject, they are a reality.
Thank you. Then we have the advantages of an experimental quantitative research design. First of all, we have to know that we have the control. The control means have control of the circumstance under an experiment that is carried out during the research. Then we have the manipulation. When we have a research, we can manipulate the variables so we can notice what is the change in the results, and in this way we can design a correct conclusion. Then we have causes and effects. It is easy to identify the causes and effects of the relationship between the variables. Besides, an experimental quantitative research can be easily replicated. Viability. An experimental quantitative research can be used in different fields and be replicated. Then we have the disadvantages of an experimental quantitative research design. We have the over-manipulation. How I said before, we can manipulate the variables, but maybe we can even over-manipulate it and affecting the results. Then we have the repetition of the research study. The research study in quantitative experimentation is replicable. So maybe if we replicate it in different contexts or in different variables, it will have the same results. Then we have the ethical issues. That means that by the ethical issues, we cannot experiment in human beings. So this limits a lot of the quantitative research. Then the cost, we have to take into account that all the experiments and all the research have a cost. Finally, we have to consider the pros and cons when we want to carry out a research in a quantitative approach. Here are some references, and thanks a lot to pay attention to our presentations. See ya!